Hello, wonderful humans. Welcome back to the first episode of our brand new series of Uprise Talks. This series, we're talking to people from the world of personal growth and entrepreneurship about what we can learn from the madness that has been 2020 and how we can seize the opportunity to create more remarkable and fulfilling lives for ourselves. Before we get started, if you'd like to support the show, please give us a quick rating on your podcast player of choice. It will help more people to find the show and find out about what we do at Uprise Academy. So, our first brilliant guest is Sondre Rasch, CEO and co-founder of Safetywing, which is a Y Combinator startup that provides insurance for the hugely growing number of digital nomads and remote workers in the world. Looking beyond the current situation, Sondre and I chat about the huge opportunities and exciting new world of work that he sees emerging over the next few years. We talk about how the global pandemic is driving a kind of globalisation 2.0, what our cities will look like, and how it's never actually been easier for people to make a really meaningful impact on the world. Our conversation left me feeling super excited about the kind of lives and careers we could all have in the near future. It was kind of like a positive ray of hope amidst all the current confusion, so I hope it does for you too. So without further ado, here's Sondre Rasch. Sondre, welcome to the show and also welcome to season 2 of Uprise Talks. So, how on earth are you doing? How is life in San Francisco right now?
Life in San Francisco it's all right, I would say. Some people are moving from San Francisco. I just learned today one of my friends decided to move to a rural area, and 2 other people in the company, because they're staying remote. His wife now for a week. Their company just announced that they're staying remote the rest of the year. So that's one thing happening in San Francisco. But other than that, it's sunny and pretty.
Yeah, I bet it's not so much the case in London. Like, we've got a little bit of sunshine at the moment, but it's kind of slowly just trying to like creep through the clouds as per usual. Hopefully we'll get there soon. So yeah, I mean, Safetywing as a company must have been really affected by the global pandemic that we're still going through. How did you as a company kind of have to respond to this? I mean, you provide insurance for freelancers and digital nomads who were spread out across the world. So I imagine it was a bit of a lot happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have customers all over the world, and they naturally reached out to us for help when it happened, and were able to ride through that storm and kind of keep customer service response time below 1 minute. That was one thing we had to do, and that was a very interesting time. In some ways, we were fortunate, because we were already remote, right? Fully remote. So it wasn't a big change to our style. And of course, on March 3rd, we launched our new, I suppose, flagship product, Remote Health, a global health insurance. And that product was more relevant. So that's been growing kind of explosively for the last 4 months. Net, I would say, it's been a wild ride, but we had to talk about it in the team today, that throughout a lot of this, it's kind of felt, at least to people in the team, that the world has been falling apart. But in the sort of world of chaos, Safetywing is this pleasant oasis of calm and order, and it's been kind of nice. So and I suppose, why is that? Well, because the model of the world we kind of had that worked before, but it works even better now. And a lot of other companies, they experience the opposite, where whatever worked before doesn't work anymore, and it takes a while to figure out the new way of working.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of kind of, I guess, your typical sort of tech startups are maybe quite well equipped to go remotely. I mean, like, we as a team are, working from home, and that's fine. We're quite unaffected, but there's a lot of companies out there who are kind of like, oh my God, what is this alien concept of remote work? Like, how can we trust our employees to do their work? How can we, physically get things done if people aren't in an office together? But yeah, obviously you guys are remote all the time, so you're used to it. How do you as a team manage those challenges where you're, I kind of saw that your team is spread kind of quite far out across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people out there saying, remote work, it makes communication difficult and all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you manage those challenges as a team?
Yeah. So there's a set of things that are harder and some that are easier in a remote team than an on-site team. And to start with, one way we solved all of them initially, but that has some other downsides, is to work synchronously. So in the first year of the company, we were sitting like we are sitting now, but the kind of three co-founders and one employee was kind of just sitting on video. Like, we weren't chatting, it wasn't a meeting. We just had it open as if we were in the same room. I just wanted to add that because it doesn't occur to many people that then there's no downside. That's like working in the same place when you do that.
Mm.
But of course it has a big cost, which is that, well, you don't get it. You have to unify the time zones, for example. And that's a bit annoying for the people in the US have to get up early and the people in Europe have to work late. So we gradually went away from that, but very aware of the problem that solved, which was this kind of serendipitous information flow and fast coordination that you get from working synchronously. Right now we have a kind of a set of hybrid solutions. So we have the Monday meeting and then we have lunch before half an hour. So lunch is just half an hour where there's nothing scheduled. So people will talk about their weekends or something. It's a kind of an MVP of getting this non-work talk happening. So people build strong relationships. We have 4 team gatherings per year. So the last was in Mexico, San Francisco, and Norway, where we gather everyone and while we do creative work, we work together. And that's really important to building strong relationships. And then there's something that's even easier when you are remote. So every Thursday we have these kind of brainstorming like meetings. One of the great one is called planning and prioritization, where we kind of write in ideas in a Google Docs. We go into small groups using this tool called Sococo, which is like Sims video conferencing kind of thing. And we go into small groups and then go into big rooms. We write all the ideas in and we rank them on effect and complexity. That particular exercise, which is a creative brainstorming exercise, works better. And we are gradually finding, more and more of those things, like the online tools for remote are becoming so good that some things is easier to do remote, even collaborative things.
What is it about it that makes it easier?
I think it's because you have it open, right? So if you're sitting live, it's rude, borderline weird if everyone sits on their computers. But the thing is that exercise works easier when people are sitting and writing in their ideas in the field and with the camera on, right? And putting in the rankings. So when we do it live, and I know this because we have tried to do the exercise live on the team gathering, and it doesn't work as well because it works best when everyone has their computer up and is looking into that.
Kind of forces you to focus.
Yeah.
You're like, well, I'm on screen, so I kind of have to, I have to be engaged with this.
Yes, exactly. So, and when you combine like a video tool with using a collaborative software like Google Sheets or Figma or something, then you can work on something together, right, on the screen. So it's not like you're disconnecting from the person by looking at your screen, you're engaging. So there is something magical happening right there, right, when you work on something together on the screen. So I think that's the thing that makes it better.
Yeah, there is something kind of like magical about it when you're connected to so many people across so many different time zones all across the world, and yet you're all kind of there in the same space doing something. Like, we found that with like workshops that we run and stuff like that. Like, there is something amazing about realizing that you're talking to people all across the world actually but you're coming together for the same unified purpose.
Yes, exactly. No, it is. I mean, it would have been seen as magical like 30 years ago, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least sci-fi, and it's pretty cool that it's now a reality.
Nice. And what about kind of measuring team performance? Because I think something that holds a lot of I guess, more traditional companies back from allowing their employees to work remotely is almost like a trust issue, or, how can I measure performance if I can't physically see that someone's doing their work from 9 till 5? So how do you kind of go about measuring performance and output versus maybe a more traditional company that's, they can clearly see their employees sat there working hours a day?
Well, the short answer is you have to measure output instead of input. I do think this is actually healthy, and it is a mistake for even on-site companies to see as a proxy to output whether someone is sitting in their office chair. Because like, I don't know if you know, but you can actually sit in your office chair and be on Twitter or something. But it is like that in many workplaces where, it's a disaster if you don't, show up to the office on time. But, whether or not you actually have a high output that's kind of seen through the fingers. But so I do think this is healthy, that you switch from, looking over people's shoulder, you switch from seeing if they're in the building, but instead look at what they make, which is their output. And when you're remote, you have no choice. So you might as well do that well. How do we do that? So the main mechanism is sort of a system of goals. So we have these long-term plans, and we write one-year goals. It's a simplified version of something called OKR. And so it's like you have goals and then you have measurable results. So for example, one of our goals is make a product people love so much to tell their friends, right? And so that's a qualitative goal. And then under that, we have measurable results. And one of them might be NPS. So that's 1 to 10, would you recommend this to a friend, which is a ranking. And then someone, I believe Jared, our head of product, is responsible for that metric going up. And that's seen as a proxy for things going well in product, kind of. And then throughout the year, we have targets we want to hit for that to progress. And every month we talk through it. And then when we get to that point on the list, Jared will update how it's going. What's the plan for the next period to reach our goals? Are we on track, etc. And the next kind of lower level of abstraction is the weekly goals. So every week people will say what they plan to do next week. They'll also write that in before the week meet, and that should then be connected to their quarterly or yearly goals that they're responsible for, either personal or. And then they put that in. They also mark one of them as a big win, and they also write what was done last week. So you can they check them off. It's like an X if they completed it, and they go through that. And so there is an extremely lightweight version, but it is sufficient. So you can definitely have much more involved. But this mechanism right here is sufficient to assuring progress in a way. Like it's very clear if goals are achieved, if outputs are measured. And beyond that, we actually don't check anything. So we have our meetings, but we don't know when or even if people are working. But it is nevertheless remarkably efficient. And we get more done than other groups of people of similar size, much more done.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because like we have a kind of similar culture in that, we don't really kind of have set, most of us we're sort of based in London, so we're all in the same place, and we do have a physical office, not that we've been there for the past 4 months, but we have a similar culture of like, you do your work, like no one's kind of checking when you're working, when you're online, when you're offline. Like it's, if you want to take Friday off and work Saturday, it's kind of, we have that autonomy, which is really nice. Like for me personally, I find that kind of feeling of being trusted to actually just do my job is kind of makes me more motivated than actually if I'm feeling like, I'm a 10-year-old and I'm back at school and I'm being watched for the hours that I'm working. Do you kind of find that, I guess going a step back, it's almost like a cultural thing, and also when you're hiring people, do you look for, do you kind of specifically hire people that you think kind of can fit that culture of remote work and like be trusted and have that kind of as a sense of autonomy as well and self drive?
We do value somewhat in independence. We do some but not for that particular reason. We do say that it's a plus if someone is, thinks remote work is cool or is a digital nomad, but for a different reason. But I guess it would work in the same way. The reasoning there is more that if someone wants the same thing we want, then we won't have to manage them because we're on the same team. So we do, value that in hiring. And of course but that happens to be that not only are we remote, but we're building for the remote world, right? So it's kind of a double win there.
Yeah.
I do think there is some getting used to, but I mean, it's a definitely necessity that people want to work remotely, but that's so common that I almost forget to ask for it. I do think you can get used to it. Everyone who starts to work remotely have to figure out self-management and like choosing a work location, whether that's at a co-working space or a particular place in their home. Different patterns for out of work socialization. There are some things, right, that everyone has to figure out, but I'm okay with them figuring that out with us in a sense. Like it doesn't take that long. It takes a few months, but then they'll figure it out.
Yeah, I guess you have to practice what you preach, right?
Right. Yes, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, as you said, a lot of people do want to work remotely these days, and you've built a whole business around people that are living remote work lifestyles, being digital nomads, whatever you want to call it. Why do you think there has been such a rise in people wanting this kind of remote work, digital nomad sort of lifestyle?
Yeah, part of it is what we're talking about here. It's freedom and autonomy. And, it's not that fun, there are on-site office environments, but when someone is literally looking at you, it's even a slightly micromanaging boss will make the environment feel very constrained. So a lot of people just long for that. They would just long to focus on their creative output instead of, doing some kind of performance in their office environment. And so that is one part of it. Another part is the kind of freedom that you get that we mentioned in the location. So like when I started out, as a remote freelancer, similarly later started a company, is the benefit that I could work from wherever and I wanted to. And I lived in Oslo at the time, which was fine, but it was quite expensive and it wasn't I didn't want to live there forever. But I realized when I worked remotely, I could actually live somewhere else. And so Berlin and San Francisco became those cities. So that freedom, the freedom to work, and we see now with this wave of remote work happening now, how many people, some people like to live in cities, but some don't. And many people live in cities only because that's where their job is, right? And if they could, they would love to live by the sea or in the mountains or in a cute village, or at least in the suburbs, right? But there is such a big benefit from living close to their job that's why they lived in the cities. Now that they live remotely, they can choose the lifestyle they want. And that is, I mean, that's a big plus. And of course, you add on to that there are also practical things which are big for some and small for others. And that's things like commute, right? Especially if you're living with someone, and so you can't easily move closer to your work and your commute is like an hour, or can you imagine wasting like 2 hours every day in a commute? Like that is not pleasant for nobody thinks that's pleasant. It's not good for them or the environment or anyone else in the queue. But so I think that's a smaller one, but that is definitely also there.
Do you think as well it helps people to maybe take more ownership and understand how they best work? Because traditionally we're all kind of brought up and taught that, okay, you wake up in the morning, you commute to work, you then work there from 9 to 5, you commute home, and then you have you do whatever you want in the evening at home. But actually, some people work really well in the morning, some people work really well in the evening, some people are night owls and like to work at 2 a.m. Like, I guess remote work also gives people that flexibility to do their work actually when suits them as people, and also the lifestyles. Maybe they've got kids, maybe there's so many different factors that kind of remote work freedom then allows people to take advantage of.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we hear. We have some people starting at Safetywing that haven't worked remotely before. And that's exactly what we hear, that I remember this guy who works, that's the guy who's just now moving out of the city. But when I worked with this for a few weeks, it was like he realized that he could go for like a long walk in the woods with his dog every day in the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just such a shock. And it's funny for me to think about, because it's been a while since I worked in the office, but I realized like you can't just go out in the middle of the working day for like an hour and a half in the woods with your dog. Obviously not, you can't do that. But
Yeah.
you work remotely, you can, and that's fully a great thing, exactly as you say, because people don't have the exact same circumstance and preferences, and being able to choose the habit, the day you want. But yeah, you're right, you do have to figure it out, and with that comes self-management. A lot of people, when they start to work remotely, they're not intentional enough about this, and they can maybe fall into some bad habits, the worst of which is to not work a separate location, that I see people do, because it's so comfortable in the couch. And it is comfortable in the couch, but then you should have a work couch. So that is true. People have to be intentional about what they want and figure it out.
I've never understood how people, like, talking to people who are obviously now working from home for the first time over the past few months, they're saying like, oh yeah, I just like wake up in the morning and work from bed. And I'm like, how can you, I don't know, like you need to have that barrier, right? Like how can you possibly wake up, work from bed all day and then go to sleep? Like you need that sort of, I guess that's the one almost good thing about having a commute, is it like, you get that barrier between like work and home in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to do the same thing, where I remember not having those separate locations. And you get exactly that same problem where because a lot of the habits you do are contextual. It's like you have a context and you act in that context automatically. So when you start mixing that up, then when I'm relaxing, suddenly I was working. And when I was working, I could be interested in doing leisure activities on my computer. And I just thought that was an intrinsic problem, and spent all this time building, these habits and discipline to make sure that, and it was so hard. And then I switched the location. So I only worked from one place in the house, and suddenly the problem was gone. So that was it. It was just go to work at a particular place in the house. Like that, it was that easy. And all the problems were gone.
Nice.
Concerning this, not all the problems in my life. I had.
If only. It's the magic cure for all problems, just moving location.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, a lot of people are working from home or working remotely for the first time at the moment. Like, where do you see the market for remote work and digital nomadism, if that's a word? Where do you see the kind of market going? Like, what does that mean for the future of work?
Yeah. Well, they're intimately connected, actually. They're actually the story of a person very often. It's my story, and now it's going to be very many other people's story. And the story starts with that they can work remotely, and then they later realize that they can work from other places, and then they move, and the digital nomad, and they're location independent in that sense. So how I see that market, I mean, that market is obviously exploding, right? So there are some different signs. So there was one survey I saw that was kind of how many thought they would keep working remotely post-COVID. And that was now in the US at 30% of the workforce. And that's up from 3.6%, which was full-time remote pre-COVID. So that's almost a 10x increase in a year. Right. We expected it. So our expectation pre-COVID was also that eventually everything will be remote. Everything that can be remote will be remote. And this adoption was just going on weirdly slowly in a sense. But now it took a big jump, huge jump. Mainstream, overnight. And, some are going to go back to work, but everyone will know that they can work remotely. Everyone who worked remotely during COVID and may still are, and many of them will continue to in the US, at least to the end of the year, like they will know that you can't go back to not knowing that you can work remotely. And since also most people like it more, right? There's surveys that show that people are happier and more productive, both self-reported and by their managers as being more productive. So why would they go back? And why would the company want them to go back? Both parties have the same interest here. And so I see remote work in general exploding sort of 10x over the course of this year, post-COVID. And that will result in a large increase in all the tools that remote first companies need and use. And it will certainly, similarly, next year, so the digital nomad explosion won't come this year for obvious reasons, but it will come next year. And that's also for that personal story thing I described, and there is a story of every company that goes remote too. And we've seen it over and over again with our customers and ourselves, which is that individuals that go remote, they figure out they can move, and then later they do. And many of them do become digital nomads, at least for a while. So remote work explosion this year means digital nomad explosion next year. And similarly with companies, there is this story that happens with all of them. They start working remotely, usually for practical reasons, actually, like you could call COVID a practical reason. Mm. And then they start putting up job ads, and we did this. You put out job ads, and then you realize you get much more applicants, much better applicants when you have location remote. Why? Because great people want to work remote, and there's a bigger talent pool. And there's no reason not to, because you're already working remote first, so you might as well. And then suddenly you find yourself hiring internationally. And then you're a fully global virtual company. And that again doesn't happen instantaneously, but by next year, we will all be there. We will be, a very large portion will be global distributed companies, and many people will be digital nomads.
Yeah. That's I guess you have the baby steps of kind of companies and employees realizing, oh, okay, I actually can work from home. Like working from home, I feel like is the first step. Mm-hmm. And then actually, so I was talking to Lily Bruins, she's a country manager for like a co-working, co-living company in Thailand. And yeah, she kind of said the same thing, like this working from home is the first step. And then once you realize you can work from home, it's actually not that big a leap to kind of think, oh, well, if I can work from home, I can kind of work from anywhere. Exactly. So yeah, there's going to be that kind of progression, I suppose. Yeah. But that's pretty interesting, because then what happens to like cities? And, we've built cities around like having office buildings, and everyone lives in cities because that's where jobs are. But I mean, do you think that's in the future, in like maybe a few years' time? Is that not going to be the case, do you think?
Well, I mean, cities will prevail. They'll just lessen in relative importance, right? So when you ask people, where would you like to live? There is a significant portion who says, I would prefer to live in a city, right? Mm. Like, regardless of the job prospects, they just like cities, right? So I do think cities will but cities for work will kind of disappear, which means that you just have to ask yourself, what's the rest of the city about? Well, it's the cluster of services and, culture and art, concerts, restaurants. Like, you just get this density in a city. And that's a big reason. That's a big reason to live here, for the kind of services that you can't consume digitally. Of course, you can still travel there. So, but relatively speaking, it's going to be like that. Prices in the cities will fall, and prices in the prettiest towns will increase, right? So, if I were to, I don't, but if I were to like do real estate, it would be to find, the cutest town in like somewhat proximity to a cool city, and like buy a house there and make it into co-living co-working space, because that's what people are going to do. They're going to move to within sort-of-ish driving distance of, let's say, San Francisco or London, but still away where they can live for much less. And of course, that's one of the big drivers here, right? You rent one bedroom in San Francisco for, $3,500 per month. But if you're like 3-4 hours out of the city, you get a mansion for that, right? So you can upgrade your one bedroom to a mansion. Right? Why wouldn't you do that? It's a fantastic deal, and that's what everyone is discovering. So city prices will fall for a little while, but it's not like they're going to go to zero or that cities will be abandoned. But the composition of who lives here will change a little bit, and prices will drop.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me while I just go and find a beautiful building in the English rural countryside somewhere. That's a great idea. I'll thank you for that one later when I've made my millions.
Yeah. Good.
Amazing. And so I want to talk a little bit about your journey as well, because you kind of touched on that before. You kind of went through this, working remotely as a freelancer, and there's obviously been a kind of path that's drawn you to where you are today. You founded a few different companies, and actually you founded a company, Consus, am I right? Yeah. Now called Superside, and you left that to kind of go all in on Safetywing. Why was that?
Yes, so I mean the origin story. So I have a bit of some would call it eclectic. For me, it's kind of narrow, but I was interested in policy before. I worked as a policy advisor for the government of Norway before that, partly with the social safety net there, actually. And then I ran the Superside, co-founded Superside, which is a platform for freelance designers working all over the world to do projects for companies. And it was in Superside where we had this idea, like we wanted to provide benefits for the freelancers in the company, like health insurance, because they didn't have it, and they also had a very insecure income, and nobody offered it. So we decided we had to build it ourselves. Or to be fair, actually first trying to get someone else to start it. For a year, I went to entrepreneurial friends, and I said, you have to build a global social safety net for freelancers. That's what I thought it was at the time. I later realized that the problem is actually remote, not freelancers, but that's what I said. And we will be your first customers, but nobody wanted to do it because I think it sounds so difficult, and it is. So after a year, nobody was going to do that. So decided, okay, we're going to have to do it. And thankfully, Hans and Sarah decided to join me in that endeavor. And that's gone pretty well. We're halfway there.
But it's kind of funny that you're just like, we just realized that we just had to do it. Why did you just kind of realize that actually this is where the market's going, and that this is like a huge problem?
This is like a huge problem. So it was very obvious to me. I'm not sure how I can get across how obvious it is. I think maybe, when I was 13 years old, I participated in this. I was like a computer nerd in my room playing games on the internet. And there was this text-based games called Planetarian where people would gather into alliances, and it would use something called IRC, which is like the precursor of Slack. It looked exactly like Slack. And it was used like Slack as well. Like people would make their own little like apps, which we called bots. And it was extremely similar to the way virtual companies work today, our alliance. And it was during this that I learned to make websites, and all for the tool of like this alliance that we were in. And I also met some friends, a Dutch and a Romanian guy, and we started a web hosting company that I had in my room. And my parents didn't know anything. I used my mother's credit card. That was actually the end of it. But the lesson, this world that now seems starting to be normal, like I lived in that 20 years ago, right? When I was a child, right? So it's like, it's kind of obvious, once you've been in it that long, that's the direction. So because the internet makes the world into, in a way, a global city, right? And many things become obsolete when everyone moved to the same city, and things become different. You have to build infrastructure as if it's one market. If you can think about it like that, it's the globalization of all markets. And some things are slow, right? And insurance, social safety nets is just like that. Like it could have been built 20 years ago. It's just one of the slower ones.
Mm.
So it's just a big part of the economy and it's obsolete. And if it's obsolete, what does that mean? Like it's not built. Well, we're talking that millions of people don't have access to like health and income protection and retirement because it's not built yet.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a real problem and it affects millions of people. And it's to me, it was just obvious that that needed to be built. Someone had to build this for the internet citizens. They needed to build the global social safety net for the citizens of the internet. And it was already overdue, years overdue from our vantage point. So, and no one else was going to build it. And I had tried to get someone else to build it. So, yeah, I just saw it as the biggest problem and no one else was doing it. So
Yeah.
I can't think of a better reason to start a company than that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's quite funny. So you mentioned like no one else wanted to do it, right? Because it was such a big task. And I can understand how, I guess, taking on the insurance industry is seems like quite a mammoth task because it's a very archaic industry that's got a lot of like red tape and policy. What kind of challenges have you faced with that, and how have you dealt with that side of things as a young startup?
Yeah. So our general strategy is one of, this might even seem odd, but we're not as radical as it is possible to be, right? So it's possible to be even more radical than us. And that would be if we were to say like, who cares about the old? Like that just all is gonna kind of wither away eventually. And we would just build the infrastructure from scratch on the blockchain or something like that. And it would be this kind of Wild West for a good while, but eventually might work. So we did not take that road. We were more like trying to kind of drag the old world with us into the future. Kind of like we made a portal. And what that means specifically is that we're approaching the old with friendly cooperativeness in a sense, right? So we're trying to build these globalized internet products that work everywhere. It's super simple and kind of the way we think people would expect them to work in the future. But we're doing that in a way that is kind of legal in cooperative spirit with existing underwriters and regulators around the world, right? So it's not it's not a rebellion. It's more like a friendly kind of construction of new infrastructure. And I do think that strategic choice is why we will succeed. And but of course that does mean that we meet many of the problems that the insurance industry have already met. So in working with partners, I do feel like we've been welcomed with open arms. The insurance industry definitely knows that the internet has happened and software has happened, but they're not that good at it yet. There are very few companies that have grown up in the internet age. There was one that went public last week, Lemonade. It was quite successful, but it's just like a handful. It's very few. So what we find challenging is of course to explain, right? So we know our customer, we know this need of this new world, the remote workers, the digital nomads, and what they expect, and then we kind of have to bridge that with how they think about things, and that's been the challenge to convey, let's say, our underwriters, which is like investors it's like backers, big financial backers of an insurance policy, or insurance partners, which has the kind of legal infrastructure and or medical network, to convince them of our product vision and kind of get them to go along with it, because we do need their help. You need a huge infrastructure to get a global insurance product to market. And that has been our greatest challenge. But now I would say we're also pretty good at it. And it really helps that we have a friendly view on them, right? So it's like we're partners and we work very well together, and I'm very grateful for the partners that we do have.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny, like I think a lot of people, when they think about San Francisco tech startups, it's all about like disruption and turning things upside down and tearing things up. And actually it's quite interesting that you kind of have still disruptive, but in a kind of friendly, disruptive in a friendly way, and a collaborative way, I guess, rather than kind of like tearing things up and starting from scratch again.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And that is our general outlook, I would say, in building this product, is to it's to acknowledge traditions while still believing in the utopia, right? While still stretching for that much better world. And that's seems like a good
what is the utopia? What's next for you guys?
Yeah, what is the utopia? I mean, the utopia we're trying to build is a country on the internet, right? I mean, in the long term. So like right now we're building products, medical products. The next is remote doctor and retirement, which is a global retirement savings. So that's like near term on the product roadmap. But if we look way ahead, sort of 10 years ahead, what we want to build is something like a country on the internet. And by country, we mean that some of the things that is today done by countries, that's actually no longer the right place to deal with that on. It's better done as a membership. And I do, whether or not it's actually us or more that we participate, support in making that happen, that we will see. But that is our secret mission. It's not what we will explain kind of on the front page or necessarily, but we're also not hiding it. It's just that I think it just sounds very ambitious, but that is what we hope to build. So, a country on the internet that is for everyone in the whole world as a membership.
Amazing. Country on the internet. I love it. And so I guess, on that note, final question that leads me to is going to be, in light of breaking normal and creating this new normal out of the madness that has just happened to the world, what do you think is the one thing you think that we could do as a collective kind of society to create a better normal for ourselves in the future?
I think it's to... Okay. Well, so, I mean, this one is a bit off, but this is what popped up in my mind. I'm not sure how practical this is, but so this whole world where there's like, everyone is connected on the internet and you can use software to make things. In that world, you can build things easier. So like 2 or 3 digital nomads, which spend like a day a week, doing freelance consulting, can build a startup the rest of the 4 days. And not only can they build a startup, they can build a startup that changes the whole world because of the way everything can be globalized so quickly, tools that are made. So we have a saying inside of Safetywing, which is all problems are solvable. And that spirit of optimism, I think I'm not sure if people realize how true it is, right? That actually you can now, if you make this switch during this time, and this is as good a time as any, to remote, maybe like freelance, and you find 2 or 3 people to start a project with, you can solve like the biggest problem you can possibly imagine. And that's like a interesting oddity about this moment in time. It's not going to be like that in the future, because then the global infrastructure will be built. But it is like that right now. So it's a very interesting time. And what we're doing is just one thing, but everything has to be built in this new world. And your customers are remote workers and digital nomads, and they're becoming more and more of them rapidly. And so that, I do actually think this is it. It is to kind of like embrace the new world and for the opportunities in it, which is to switch to remote, become a digital nomad and start a startup for the new world. Like, I do think that is the fastest way to the new normal, because, one of the reasons it is a bit chaotic now is also because we're in a transitionary period. And, what used to work doesn't work anymore. We have to get to the new well. Here's the thing, that a lot of those things aren't built yet. So you got to make the things that will work in this kind of globalized internet world. And that's how we get to the new normal, is by a lot of people who hear this, who are in the position where that they actually take it upon themselves to do that. And I do think that will bring us to the new normal. I know that wasn't what you were thinking, but
no, that was amazing.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. It's like we're basically moving towards a kind of almost like a second wave of like globalization in a way. It's like globalization 2.0 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, before we go, do you want to tell people how they can find out more about you, about Safetywing, connect with you, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. So the website is safetywing.com, and we sometimes publish blog articles. Definitely follow us on Facebook, I think is the best, or we also have a very fun Instagram account if you want to see the things we publish, whether that's new products for remote or digital nomads or articles about how to build a country on the internet. It's all there. So
just how to build a country on the internet, your casual how-to.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, I will put all the links in the show notes as well. And Sondre, thank you very, very much for joining us on Uprise Talks today.
Thank you, Katie. It was great.
Thanks for listening. I hope you're feeling as excited about this new world of work as I am. If you enjoyed the show, please take just 2 seconds to give us a rating on iTunes. It really helps support what we're doing and helps other people find the show as well. Next episode, we'll be talking to Nick Telson, one of the UK's top angel investors, exited co-founder of Design My Night, and host of the Pitch Deck podcast, about how entrepreneurs can help shape a more positive new normal and what opportunities are out there. See you next time.